As I was archiving information into the data storage of Deinonychus, I happened upon my own interrogation regarding the rebellion of Busa. Mind you, without that rebellion, I am sure that the whole world would have seceded from the Imperium, and those darn idiots in the government would have found the brand of heretic the least of their worries. As I listen to the audio log, I must admit that it makes me smile. Do not get me wrong, Imperial interrogations are nothing if not horrifying experiences, but in that voice of an angry, scared, at times even sensible young woman, I hear the conviction of so many others. The rebellion of Busa was not organized well, or not as well as I had hoped. I was not in the lead of the rebellion from the start, as many might think. Sergeant Limas from Busa's PDF was the first in command for quite a while. He organized things as well as he could, but with limited resources and limited education, you work with what you have. He was a fine man, smoked a lot, and told us over and over again a story of how he and his wife met during his first mission. She was killed on their 20th. That's all I remember of the story anymore. Anyway, I wasn't the only one fighting for the Imperium in those troops. Goodness, that would have been a short rebellion had that been the case. We had a ragtag group of people from all over the world gathering in the city of Helmstead, ready to fight for Busa and the Emperor. I was originally part of a 5-person squad, and I still consider them to be an extension to my family. There was Rufus, the grandpa of our family. He was over 70 years old and had eyes like a hawk. Nobody quite knows how that was possible. He was a man who hadn't been to a war, but had fought some gangs in his youth. With some training, he made an excellent lookout and a brilliant shot with a sniper. He had the biggest love, and we had to shush him from time to time so he wouldn't alert the enemy. I think he was the one who taught me to whistle. Lita and Amias, a mother and son duo, were also a part of the group. Lita had grown on the streets, and because of that she and Rufus often had arguments. Lita was a tough one, hardly broke a smile when we first met. Half of her body was covered in tattoos, and I must admit I fail to remember the gang she was a part of. Something Skull it was. No matter, this tough lady was our weapons expert. If you gave a gun to her, she knew both how to operate it and how to fix it. She smiled at me for the first time when I showed her that I was far from a bad shot. With enough alcohol, she told me stories of the gang life and how this rebellion was both sticking it to the man and to fight for the Imperium. She was religious, as was Amias. Amias was in his late 20s and absolutely the muscle of the group. He wasn't much of a looker, nor could one expect any deeper analysis from him on, well, any subject, say, for street fighting. He had a girlfriend back home, and he collected trinkets for her. I remember he tried to get pins from blown-up grenades, which he wove into a necklace for his love. At one point, all of us grabbed a pin from the ground to give to Amias later. Then there was Morrow. Jumis was his real name, but we called him Morrow for his catchphrase, "I'll do it tomorrow." He must have been the laziest 16-year-old I've ever met when it came to things outside of battlefield. If the word procrastination had a picture in the dictionary, Morrow's smug face would be grinning at the reader from it. When not on field, we had to wake him up from his naps to eat, and more than once both Lita and Rufus noted that Morrow should keep his bunk and everything else he touched clean. It was like a mother and a grandpa lecturing a lazy son. That lanky boy was like a little brother to me, and one of the best scouts I've ever had a pleasure to work with. Many a hit we did, one of the most memorable of them being when Amias took out 2 of the 7 guards of a supply transport Morrow had reported to us with a brick. Rufus blew off the head of the 3rd, I took down the 4th, and Lita had immense fun with lasgun with 2 of them. Morrow himself was in a tight spot and had to use his combat knife to defend himself. What made it memorable was that in that supply transport there was a Voxcaster. Our troops desperately needed one, and we took it to Sergeant Limas as fast as we could. He was as happy as a lark with this discovery of equipment, and suggested that as a reward from our acquisition, if there ever was a second one to be found, our team would get it. I said that there was no need, and that it would be better to be in common use. After all, what is the use of a telepath in a group if our talents are not used? When Sergeant Limas learned of my powers, the first 2 uses he came up for them were communications in addition to mental torture and manipulation. I do not particularly enjoy the latter duo, though I must admit that I have used my powers for them a number of times. It took quite a lot of convincing from me and Limus to make Lita lower her weapon the first time I tried explaining to her that I could speak to her inside her mind. After a while, she got used to it and even joked that I would have been such a handy addition to her gang. Some in our rebellious group did not get used to it. The boys had nothing against me, but some other members started avoiding me. I had whispers of me being tainted and a witch, and, well, I cannot blame them. At one point I was quite sure that some of them were planning to get rid of me, and I was ready to defend myself if it came to that. Thank the Emperor, it did not. Limus was a charismatic man, despite some of his faults. He gathered us all together in a hall and asked me to step in front of everybody. He told them who I was and what I was capable of, or at least to the extent that he knew. He told them what my purpose was as well, to interrogate, to get information, to keep the rebellion up to date with everything the government was up to. It didn't appease all of them, but at least they left me in peace. They knew what my purpose was, and I knew what theirs was. If the worst came to pass, they'd shoot me on sight. No matter, our side started using that Voxcaster we stole on an old frequency Limus knew wasn't in use. He taught us all how to use the Vox, which made operating much easier for a while. We could organize our troops better like this, and there weren't as many losses as before. However, as I mentioned, this rebellion was not the best organized, and so, in our haste, we had overlooked some things. The Vox was old, the line was old, and the codes we used were also old. Old for the PDF. I do not know at which point they discovered the channel we used, nor when they realized that they had the key to the code we used in their archives. We were tracking one of the main leaders of Abuser in the streets of Helmstead. The idea was to kidnap her and exchange her for a certain area in the city, after a proper mind probing, that is. Nevertheless, our tracking was successful. We found the lady. As we captured her vehicle and Sergeant Limus opened the door, there was indeed a lady in the leader's clothes, but it was all a ruse. We were caught in crossfire and had to escape by any means necessary. Even Rufus's shots were all for naught. Ammius had to replace his arm after the battle, and Sergeant Limus got about 6 feet away from the car before it blew up. He was dead, and so was the undoubtedly underpaid actress in the car. I hope Limus found his wife beside the Emperor. Without a leader, the liberation of Abuser started to seem unlikely. To add insult to injury, our Voxcast was destroyed in all the commotion. The rebels, or the Aquila Guard as we called ourselves back then, gathered in a battle-ruined part of Helmstead. I remember vaguely scanning the thoughts of people. So many were scared, others utterly hopeless. Their leader was no more, and he had been the one with tactics. For a moment I looked at Lita, and I didn't even have to scan her thoughts. She was worried about her son, of whom we did not yet know if he had survived his injuries. Of all the people, Morrow was the one who got the attention of the whole lot. The little idiot swung like a monkey from a rafter and shouted everyone to keep quiet before looking at me. Perhaps it was because he had gotten used to hearing my voice in the battlefield, telling him what to do, that he assumed that I'd take the control of the situation again. And I did. I told everyone that we fucked that mission up and that we needed new tactics. We needed a new Vox system, and I promised our lot we'd get one. Not for communication, but for spying. Limes had left behind notes of tactics and lines that were in use. People asked me how we would communicate between groups, and I answered them. I will do it. I'm a telepath, and you all know that Limus wanted to use me to access people's heads. What I want is to use my talents to communicate with you. After a long silence, people started warming up to my idea. I would communicate between groups, and the groups would communicate between themselves. Mind you, there were people that were seriously doubting me and my skills, and were it not for the original intention of Limus to put my skills to use, and his speech to them after they found out about my powers, I believe they would have quit then and there. And don't get me wrong, managing a large group of soldiers takes a toll on you. Naturally, the other side had much more troops, but they didn't quite literally use their heads to do it all. Imagine hearing everything a person is thinking, and them hearing your thoughts too. Imagine you're on a mission in which your life depends on your stealth, and in your head, You hear how someone else is panicking, shouting, "Die, die, die, why won't you die already?" at an enemy you cannot see. Not easy, is it? We did get some voxcasters, and we did manage to make the systems work again. No prisoners this time. We had seen how much the government cared for our lives and the lives of civilians. The actress wasn't the only civilian casualty in this war, unfortunately. We walked the streets at night, slipping from shadow to shadow, lighting up warehouses, stealing supplies, even assassinating people. Most of all, however, me and Morrow did some scouting missions towards the biggest operation I organized, the occupation of the governing palace of Helmstead. I had entered the minds of a few officers beforehand and wiped their memory of this to gain some inside knowledge of the comings and goings of the guards, and even some important people. There were 4 squads in this operation, and I was more than ready to face the fact that we were outnumbered, and many of us would perish. 2 of the groups got inside the building from doors or windows, 1 from the sewers, and the 4th one was to act as a distraction. Were we successful, our team would raise the flag of our rebellion, a yellow flag decorated with a black aquila and a lasgun beneath it, on top of the palace. The distraction worked as it should have, luring away guards from the front doors. Not all of them, mind you, as we were so naive to believe. As me and my group entered from the 2nd floor windows, I cannot say how the entrance from the front door went, but as there was no alarm raised immediately, I believe it went relatively well. Me and Morrow went in first and scanned through the corridors, giving room for Amias and his new hand to crush some guards' heads against the walls. Then came the sound of alarms, not only in the palace, but in the city in general. I had heard nothing negative from the other groups, so we moved forward. For a brief moment, I thought it was the rest of our guard, operating on their own in other places in the city, and I scolded them silently in my mind, thus informing everyone of our troops in the palace of the presumed recklessness of our friends and my slight worry for their safety. Needless to say, I used a minute or two calming everyone down while Lita started shooting oncoming guards and narrowly missed a servant carrying a glass of Amasec on a tray. For the distraction, she received 2 lash shots in her leg from a guard Rufus shot after a moment. I myself took the servant and inquired after the person who had ordered the Amasec. It was very kind of him to tell that the planetary governor was in his quarters in the palace. After Rufus had then defined Lita's wounds to be manageable after some first aid, we moved on. I don't believe that Lita would have let us go on without her anyhow. We rushed through the corridors into the quarters of the planetary governor and were greeted with a firing squad aiming at us. I ran in first, a stupid girl as I was, and got hit by a las rifle into the chest and shoulder. Thank goodness for armored body gloves. They also hit Morrow, who was not so lucky. A lash shot through his neck made sure he didn't move from that door. I was a fool to lead him there in such haste, and it was maddening to see the young man's body just lie there, still. In my anger, I released a pulse of psychic rage in the form of a scream towards the enemy. I'm not sure who hurt more, me or them, for they just held their heads. And so did Lita. She was the next one in the room, right after us. I got up, since the shots I'd taken had made me fall, and rushed in the room, changing my pistol to a chainsword. Then the whole building shook as the explosions from beneath the building trembled the earth. Apparently the sewer squad had to improvise, and everyone in the room had to try and stay on their feet. I was the closest to achieve that, only falling on my knees. Needless to say that me and Amias, who came in after Lita, made a mess in the room. The planetary governor was finally found in the safe room of his quarters, ready to fight. I bet he wasn't ready for recovered Lita's burst of fire she delivered on him. His last words were, "Come at me, rebel scum!" It would have been Morrow's job to raise the flag, but now the boy lay on the floor, unmoving, a surprised look on his face. I informed everyone that the governor was dead, and only now realized that my shoulder was in immense pain. It was Rufus who eventually raised the flag. Amias walked around the governor's quarters, keeping watch, and finally raised one of the grenades from the ground. I think it was left there by the firing squad. He tossed the grenade outside, keeping the pin, and with me, Lita, and the explosion outside as his witness, laid the pin of the grenade on Morrow's chest. Sometimes I miss you, little brother. After quite a while, Rufus came back. I nodded as a response. For a moment it was quiet, "There's more," he said with a serious look on his face. I gazed at the old man's stern expression. I was suddenly very much aware that I couldn't hear the thoughts of my fellow rebels. "Are they?" I asked, and found it increasingly difficult to breathe. "The others? I don't know. What I do know is that there are a group of giants in proper armor coming to the palace," Rufus said. "Astartes,"